Hello and welcome back to the Pro Series podcast. This is episode 93 with Courtney Elmer. She is a top-ranked podcast host and creator of PodLaunch. She helps people from all over the world create Apple Top 100 podcasts. We talk about all about podcasting, how she got out of her full-time job into this podcasting world. It's a fun interview, so if you're wanting to create a podcast or just want to learn more about podcasting, this is an episode for you. But before we dive into this episode, please like, subscribe, and review this podcast on wherever you listen to podcasts. And now I hope you enjoy episode 93 with Courtney Elmer. Courtney, thank you so much for coming on the Pro Series podcast today and talking about your business and podcasting and your personal story. I can't wait to talk to you.
Eric, it's exciting to be here. Thanks for reaching out and asking me to be a guest.
Yeah, I always try to start out the episode on how I found my guest, and it was you kind of came up on, like majority of my guests, you come up on my Discover page. You know, once you start looking at one person that's kind of similar, they keep coming up. And I saw some of your video content and you describing like podcasts and how to grow your podcast and different marketing strategies with podcasting. I'm like, wow, I've never had anybody on here, and you sound like you know so much on this topic, and I would love to pick your brain on it and just hear your story.
Absolutely. You know, Eric, it's interesting because my journey, like many entrepreneurs' journeys, has been filled with twists and turns. It has been quite a roller coaster ride. And really, it all started back in my mid-20s. I had just gotten married to the love of my life. We had gone on a beautiful honeymoon. We came home from our wedding, and I had had a follow-up visit scheduled with my doctor that day for a really bad sinus infection that I had had a few weeks prior to the wedding. So I went in for that follow-up visit, and my doctor sat me down, and he was kind of acting a little strange. And I'm like, what is going on? You know, there's just a weird vibe that I was getting from him. And he said, look, I need to introduce you to someone who's going to be taking over your case. And I'm like, wait, what? I have a case? Who? What are you talking about? He's like, here's Dr. So-and-so. You know, she walks in the room, and he said, she's going to be taking over for me. This really falls beyond my area of expertise. And I'm like, what is going on? So this beautiful doctor sits down. She looks me in the eye and she said, Courtney, she said, you know, those tests we ran a couple of weeks back, she said, the results are in. And she said, you have thyroid cancer. And my husband's sitting in the room with me, and I look at him and he just kind of looks at me, and I'm like, what did you just say? And she said, you are the youngest patient that I have ever had with this diagnosis. And I've cleared a schedule for you on my surgery list next Monday. I need you to be here. And then we just kind of went, and I was like, what is happening right now? And it was one of those moments where, you know, in a movie where it's like the actor's there and it's like everything just goes into slow motion, and you're just sitting there, and like life is happening around you, but it's in slow motion, and you're aware of it, but you're like, also like, what is going on? It was one of those kind of moments. And so fast forward, I went through surgery, treatment, radiation, recovery. And actually, right before we hit record, I looked at the date and I realized 4 days from the time of this recording, it will now be 10 years that I've been cancer free, which, praise God, I'm so grateful for. But that was what set me on this journey of entrepreneurship, because that was the moment sitting in that doctor's office that day with that terrible fluorescent light just buzzing overhead and kind of my whole life flashing before my eyes, that I realized that I was doing nothing with the gifts and the talents that I had been given. I was doing nothing to make a difference in the world. I was climbing that corporate ladder like many of us do, you know, before we stumble into this whole life of entrepreneurship. And I was doing well. I was successful by all the world's standards, but I felt so empty inside. And I just realized I've got to make a change, because as cliche as this is going to sound, that was the moment I realized how short life really is.
Oh, yeah. It's so crazy how everybody has a different story that comes on this podcast, or just in general, starting an entrepreneurship. They have a different story, but in the scheme of things, it's all the same, that they felt empty, or they felt like they were doing this work for someone else, or it wasn't fulfilling something in their life. And that's kind of something entrepreneurship everybody has in common and wants to strive for.
Totally. It's amazing how that is. And no matter where we start and wherever we wind up, that is something I feel we all have in common on this journey.
So right then, did you start your company?
No. I wish
No?
I could say, yes, that was a complete
Okay.
180 moment for me and everything changed and it's been amazing ever since. But no, Eric, I went back to working 9 to 5 and nights and weekends and lunch breaks because that was what I knew.
Hmm.
And that was my comfort zone. And so I thought, oh, maybe with just a little bit more mindset shifts, maybe with a little more meditation built into my day, maybe taking a few more vacations and weekends off, I could find that elusive balance that we all
Okay.
chase for. Right. And really at the root of it all, I was afraid. I was so scared to step out and to do anything, put my stake in the ground and say, this is what I stand for. And this is what I'm here to do. And using my voice to say, I was so afraid to be rejected and to be abandoned. And to at the time realizing, I was making it mean that I was not lovable if people rejected me and if they didn't agree with me. And if, recovering people pleaser my whole life is really was my song and dance. And it took me a couple of years before I actually decided, you know what? I'm not going to keep procrastinating this. I'm not going to keep putting off my dreams or my goals, my life, just waiting for the right time or the right opportunity or this right feeling inside of me to know that, now is the time to hit, the go button. And so that was 2013 that I got that diagnosis. And I just hemmed and hawed and dragged my feet until 2017 when I finally opened the doors to my company. And there was a lot of growth that happened in that time. Looking back, super grateful for all of it. And also just like kicking myself. It's like, Courtney, what were you so afraid of? What were
Hmm.
you so afraid of? But I share that because the fear is so real. We
Hmm.
all have it. We all experience it. And it kept me, what is that, 13 to 17, 4 years? I mean, that's a long time to just drag your feet on something you want to do. But I just couldn't get myself, get the guts to do it.
Absolutely. And that's something that you look back on, yeah, you kick yourself for not doing it, but are you thankful for what it has built in you as an entrepreneur on your drive and that you never want to go back to that mindset or that way of life ever again?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it really plays such a huge role into the whole ethos of what we do as a company today, which is this idea of anti-fragile
Mhm.
entrepreneurship, where a lot of people don't realize this, but they think, when life happens, when the rubber meets the road and things are chaotic, things are difficult, you're facing adversity, maybe it's in your business, maybe it's personally. At the time that we're recording this, we don't know what's going to happen with the economy here in the next few months. And there's a lot of uncertainty. So in those moments in life, we tend to think that when stress and chaos happen, when we're under pressure, that if only we could learn how to better withstand the pressure, that we'll be better equipped to handle it in the future.
Mhm.
That describes resilience. An organism that's resilient is something that bounces back from pressure fairly well. And I reached a point where I just didn't want to keep bouncing back from chaos in my life. I
Yeah.
didn't want to just keep being better equipped to handle it. I wanted to actually grow through it and grow because of it. Little did I know that there's actually a word for that. And the word is anti-fragility. And it's on the opposite end of the spectrum of something that is essentially fragile. You think about a glass ornament that goes on a Christmas tree, or
Mhm.
something that's made with something that's very delicate, a Fabergé egg or something, right? If any pressure is applied to that thing, it's crushed into a million pieces and there is no coming back from that.
Yeah.
That's fragile. On the opposite end of that spectrum is anti-fragile, which means that when you're faced with chaos, pressure, stress, uncertainty, adversity, it means that you grow through it and that you grow because of it. And I like to say, in layman's terms, because a lot of times I'll say anti-fragility and people are like, that's cool. What is that? And it really means just growing through what you go through in life.
Absolutely. Did you have a background in psychology? Like a lot of this has to do with psychology. I'm like listening. I'm like, well, okay, she has to have some type of background in it.
I love that you're picking up on that. So formally, my training is in English literature, which has
Okay.
absolutely nothing to do with what I do today. It's one
Yeah.
of those things where I was like, this is my degree path. I transferred schools and here I am now on this degree path. And I don't want to start over from scratch. So that's why I have that degree. But I also did pursue further studies in psychology. And a lot of my coaching training is very psychology based. So that
Okay.
is where a lot of this comes from.
Yeah, I had a couple of I was telling you off camera, I had a couple of for mindset coaches for entrepreneurship. And the reason why I kind of brought them on is, it's so easy to listen to like a motivational speaker on entrepreneurship, on getting rid of, just getting out of that corporate world and starting your own company. But you can't, that's easier said than done for some people. And for majority of the people, they need to change that whole mindset, flip that switch in their head to get to the point where they could actually, hey, I'm going to quit my job and start this thing that's very scary, and get their mind right so they could actually succeed in the entrepreneur, like into that new field.
Yeah, it's a huge element of it. And in the very beginning of my business, which interestingly enough was just called Courtney Elmer Coaching, because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was just like, I'm going to do this thing, but I have no clue what I'm doing. And that was really my focus in the early days, was helping people work on their mindset. And I quickly found that while as powerful as that is, and as much as it has helped me and been the very reason why I am where I am today, it wasn't marketable. And it wasn't marketable because people didn't see it as an essential piece of business growth and success. We all tend to think mindset's important. We know it's important. But when it actually comes down to it, a lot of us are more drawn into this next tactic or this shiny object that can help us increase leads or client enrollments or get more sales or close that next big deal. And so that's what we tend to focus on. Whereas we really don't recognize that it is an inside out process. We have to grow ourselves first before we can expect to grow the business. And I always look at it like this, where I was like, if you're trying to grow a business and you're looking to all of these outside means to do that, whatever that might be, your marketing, your ad strategy, your sales training that you're training your team on how to sell for you, all of these things that we could potentially be doing in our business. There's millions of things we could be doing. Unless we take a look at the human behind the business and the degree to which the human is growing and changing and thriving, then the business will never be able to fully grow or change or thrive. Because
Oh
your
yeah.
business growth as an entrepreneur is dependent on your growth as a human.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And it's very obvious when we sit here and talk about it. Well, yeah, of course, that makes total sense. But do we practice it?
Mm,
That's the
exactly.
question. Yeah,
Or you just don't even know that it's the issue.
right.
A lot of people are blinded by it.
Totally.
So when did the podcasting come into play?
Yeah. So about 3 years ago, I was
Oh, that reason. Okay.
yeah, which is crazy. It hasn't been that long. Been in business for almost 7 years now total, right? 2017 to time of this recording, 6.5 or so years. But about 3 years in, I had done everything you could think of to market my business. Right? Facebook ads, which I didn't have a huge budget for at the time. So was getting nowhere with that, nowhere fast.
Yeah.
Social media, all the short form content, all the things that you can imagine to try to get visible, grow your audience, all of that. And I was so frustrated because I was a new mom. And my son was home with me full time. And I was working in the nooks and crannies of the day. When he would take a nap, I'd hit my inbox. When he would take his next nap, I'd sit there and crank out that next post for Instagram. And I was getting so fed up because I was not seeing any kind of result from my efforts. I was putting in a lot of time and effort for very little payoff. Posting 3 to 4 times a week, constantly coming up with content ideas that just would drive zero sales. My content getting buried in the news feed after 24 hours, putting a post out and being like, this is such a good post. This is so valuable for people. And like 2 people would like it, and you're like, what the heck? What is going on? Why is this not working for me? And at the time, my only way to get space in the day was to strap my son into his stroller, put in my AirPods, and go for walks in the neighborhood. And I would listen to podcasts, trying to find the secrets to growing my audience and what could I do to increase client enrollments and, trying to get to where I wanted to go in business.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, I don't know what it was, Eric, but it dawned on me and I said, why not a podcast? If these people are here every week sharing their wisdom and their knowledge and expertise with me, and I'm sitting here in their audience consuming that content, getting value from it, why couldn't I be the person on the other end of the mic, share the wisdom and knowledge and expertise and experience that I have, and provide that same kind of value for others? And it
Mm-hmm.
was like a little switch just flipped on in my brain. I knew nothing about podcasting, But immediately I saw the value in it because I had recognized the relationship that I had built with these hosts that I listened to and the way in which I looked up to them and aspired to be like them and trusted them and would have bought anything from them. And I thought, how powerful would it be to have the same thing in my business? So I launched my podcast in February of 2020. This was right before everything shut
Oh
down for the
man,
pandemic.
what a time.
What a time. Oh my gosh. Launched the show. Within 48 hours, we had over 65 five-star reviews, thousands of downloads. And I didn't know about ranking or charting. And now, of course, I know how to hook all that up and check and see, where are you ranking in the world and all of this. And I just didn't know what I didn't know. So I'm sure we ranked with that kind of, demand for the show that early out the gate. But I don't have any screenshots to prove it because I'm like, shoot, I didn't even know that. I didn't know you could do that. Right. So we had this amazing success early on. And I was just loving being there, showing up for my audience. People were reaching out, DMing me, Courtney, I didn't know that you taught this. I didn't know that you knew all that. How can I work with you? Right. And a lot of times those DMs would be from colleagues in my industry saying, how did you launch this thing? And can you tell me what you did? So I had so many people reaching out, asking me that question too, that I was like, look, guys, I'll show you what I did. Let's just have a series of Zoom meetings. I look back now, I guess they were like my focus group. I'm like, I'll teach you what I did. Let's see if you can get these same results. So one of those colleagues in particular, who's a trademark attorney of all things, right? You think like the most boring industry, like attorney, trademark, podcasting, who's going to listen to that? He launched his show with what is now our proven method and got over 100 five-star reviews. He landed number 34 in the business charts, which is one of the most competitive categories. And he said, Courtney, we had our best month in sales ever. And I know it was because of the buzz that this podcast generated. And then this focus group started putting this theory to the test. They started doing it with their own podcast. And Eric, I would be here all day if I could sit here and tell you their stories and their rankings and their numbers and the amazing success that they have had. They are all top 1% podcast hosts now. And the leverage that they've been able to create in their marketing because of it.
Yeah.
That's when I kind of sat back and I'm like, I think I'm onto something here. And even though this was not the path that I intended, to be here teaching podcasting, I have always been passionate about helping others use their voice to catalyze positive change in the world. And now, 3 years later, having done this myself and taught many, many others how to do it, I could think of no better place for me to be, teaching podcasting and really helping people not only get their message out there, but get their message heard in the
Yeah.
way that it deserves.
Oh, absolutely. I love that because you probably have heard this, but the stigma of people having podcasts in the past, maybe 5 years, or maybe since COVID happened, people are like, oh, just another person with a podcast, just another podcast. But, it's such a good way to get to an audience in a way that social media can't get to, or just regular marketing, paper marketing, or digital marketing in general. So, I mean, we could talk for hours on this topic. And I think one day we need to have another episode with you on it just to learn more. But I want to end this episode on where people could find you, where they could find your podcasts on social media, all of that.
Yes. So because this is something I love to teach, and because, we could sit here and talk about how amazing and how powerful podcasts are. The latest stat is that someone now has to spend 7 hours with you before they're ready to make a buying decision. I did the math. That's over 1,600 Instagram reels. I, I don't have the time for that. I don't know.
No.
Someone listening, maybe more power to you if you've got the time and the stamina for that, but I don't. That's just a few podcast episodes. However, I will say this, and I always caveat it with this. You have to have the right strategy going into it, because otherwise you're going to wind up in the Apple graveyard where most podcasters go after, based on the latest stats, episode 6, because they start this and get all excited about how amazing a podcast could be for their business, but because they didn't have the right strategy going into it to create the leverage, to convert the listeners to leads and clients, they wind up putting a lot of time and effort in for nothing. And it becomes just like all the other marketing things that they've tried that didn't work for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I host a regular workshop, regularly recurring every month or so, where I will teach you our strategy for launching an Apple Top 100 podcast. These workshops are free. I don't pitch you our program. There's no pitch in this workshop. I want you to think of it more like a roundtable discussion. It's not a boring webinar where I'm just teaching you. I'll teach for a little bit, and then I'm going to hand the mic over to you and say, hey, ask me your questions. Let's talk about your business. Let's see if your business is ready for a top 1% podcast. And
Mhm.
together we can explore if that is the next best step for you. So if you're listening right now and your interest is piqued and you're intrigued, I would invite you to check out the link where we've got all the up-to-date information. No matter when you're listening to this episode, you always have the latest date and time for that upcoming workshop. They're live. They're not pre-recorded. This is me in my Zoom room talking with you. And you could go to theeffortlesslife.co/podcast workshop to get that info.
Awesome. And is it just podcast form, or do you also have it in like a video form as well?
Yeah, it's video as well. It's video and
Okay.
audio. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
I'm
So
actually, I'm a fan now and I want to listen to this. I think people think podcasting as something that it's like pop culture or sports or something, but there's so much you could learn in podcasting. And this is just one of those ones that will help you in your meantime going to an appointment or going to that corporate world job and you're trying to get the courage to leave. This is something you should be listening to build up that mindset and get ready for that leap.
absolutely. And speaking of podcasts, if you are a podcast listener and you love podcasts, I'd love for you to come check mine out as well. It's called Anti-Fragile Entrepreneurship. Everywhere podcasts are found, whatever app you're listening to right now, you'll be able to access it.
Awesome. And where can they follow you on social media?
Yeah, Instagram's the #1 platform. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, but Instagram is at the Courtney Elmer. I'm there pretty much every day, with the exception of right now. I technically am on a summer social media hiatus, but typically I'm there every day sharing, content about how to launch a podcast, how to leverage it as part of your marketing strategy so that it can help you grow your business and make you the go-to in-demand expert in your niche.
Awesome. Courtney, thank you so much for hopping on the Pro Series podcast today. Can't wait to get this out and everybody learn more about you, your company, and podcasting.
Thank you for having me, Eric. This has been fun.